have 3 losses by now.
I don't know about that.
They are not that good.
Put Florida State in there, I would say yes to that, what you just said.
On return by Caleb Downs. And he finds a seam. He makes the punter look silly. Caleb Downs, show him what you got. Touchdown, Bama.
I'm going to drive now for UTEP. And they will keep it on the ground. Amblot just gets pile-driven by Stutzman.
Really haven't even tried from the shotgun. That throw's intercepted. Pierce down the sideline. Touchdown.
Claiborne, the sophomore, has 1 score so far this season. Griffiths will buy a little bit of time. Falling down, lost the football. Play is still live. And recovered by the Monarchs. Lamarian James will take it the other way for the ODU touchdown.
Welcome back to Devy IDP Grind. I'm Hollywood. I'm joined by my co-host Justice. What's going on, man?
Not much, man. It's the night before the 4th. Hopefully, everyone stays safe tomorrow. Does not lose any digits.
Don't be out there pulling a JPP, losing all your digits.
That's right. That's right.
But yep, big plans for tomorrow.
Just hanging out with my parents. That's about it.
Cool. We're not doing anything either. A little grilling, a little chilling, a little music, watching the neighbors maybe blow their fingers off. So, it's just a casualty of war.
Yeah.
But no, we're back this week. We're doing the conference, individual conference coaching changes and IDP player updates. This week is the Big 12 conference. I think we've only got, 2 or 3 left?
4 left. Big 10 and the SEC, the only 2 left.
Right. So, yeah, that's going to put us pretty close to being right on track for the start of the season. So, we got those 2 left, and then we'll figure out something for the other couple of weeks till the season kicks off. But I'm ready to go. I wish it was kicking off tomorrow myself. But
well, camps open, I think, for teams that are playing week 0. I believe camps open the 24th, somewhere around there, the 24th of this month. And then I think for everybody else, they opened up the 29th. So it won't be long before we get some fall camp news.
Yeah, it won't be too long. Won't be long at all. Speaking of news, we got some news and notes. July 1st was a big moment for a lot of teams, a lot of conferences. As on July 1st, conference realignments for 2024 are officially in place. So Texas, Oklahoma are officially part of the SEC. Cal, Stanford, and SMU officially joined the ACC.
Kennesaw State officially joined Conference USA.
Yeah,
Army
yeah.
Army officially joined the Athletic AAC, American Athletic Conference.
Yeah, there's a lot of changes. We've been talking about them, but they're now official, and there's some more on the way. So, be interesting to see how some of those play out. Talking about Texas, they officially shut down the Longhorn Network.
I hadn't heard that. Interesting. I mean, I guess they had to. I guess that was part of the deal, right? I mean, SEC doesn't want someone having their own network, so
I'm sure that's what it was. Like, hey, if you're going to come be a part of the big boys, then this pettiness that you had with the Big 12 or whatever, that goes away. We don't play that way. So,
I mean,
that's
as a baseball fan, like, and it's totally off topic, but I gotta ask your opinion, man. Like that whole Texas A&M Texas thing, buddy, that was, man, like the guy sits there and blasts a blasts a reporter for asking about leaving, and then like as soon as the game ends, he's gone to Texas. Like what?
Yeah, it was less than 10 hours.
Right.
I mean, he blasted that poor reporter, and I was like, okay, I get it. You just lost a national championship, and he's asking you about moving to another school. I mean, it happens. It's happened before. I wake up the next day, and it's like, whatever his name, Schlossnagel or whatever his name is, gone to Texas. And I was like, what? Are you kidding me? But hey,
Congrats! By the way, I was
exactly.
I was pulling for your volunteers. I don't think I've ever shared this with you, but a good friend of mine and a guy I played softball with a number of years. He is Cannon Peebles' uncle.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's cool. And thanks for the cheering for us because we needed it. We needed it.
It got dicey.
But I know once we got to the third game, it did. Bonehead balked and moved the guy to third. And he didn't even know he was on second.
And then wild pitches, man. I was like, what in the world?
I was like, I can't even be mad if we lose this. This would be the most Tennessee thing ever if this happened. But luckily it didn't, and we're national champions. So for all you baseball fans, y'all could suck it for a whole year because you're bound to us for the next year. So, TNT and the Mountain West Conference. I don't know if you saw this. They announced a partnership and a TV schedule for this year. So they're going to host 14 games. The TNT is, and they're going to be on True TV and Max. Looks like most of them. And it looks like San Jose State is going to be the key team. They've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games. I kind of like this, and I'll tell you why. Other than being more football, right? If I'm not mistaken, the Mountain West, most of their games were on CBS Sports Network, I think, the last few years.
Yeah.
So they're changing over to the TNT family brand. But these 14 games are all late games. I take that back. There's 2 of them. One of them that's kind of early at 2:00, but most of them start at 4:00 or later. So Pacific it's going to be in that afternoon. Yeah. So it's going to be in that late window. So I like that. Like I said, San Jose State has 5 games. Looks like Fresno has 3. And then everybody else is just kind of mixed and matched in. But yeah, I'm kind of excited to see that. The Utah Utes have named a head coach in waiting. So their current defensive coordinator, Morgan Staley, will replace current head coach Kyle Whittingham whenever he decides to retire or hang it up or whatever he wants to do. That's something we haven't really seen at the college level. I mean, we haven't seen a whole lot of it at the pro level either, but in college, that's an oddity to me. You don't really see a whole lot of
that. No, I mean, maybe it's something that'll become more common. I don't know.
And I wonder if this is maybe something they know that we don't know, type deal, or if it's just they're just kind of wanting to go ahead and say, hey, whenever he's done, we're not pushing you, but whenever he's done, this is our next guy. Interesting. Staying with Utah, their former quarterback Alex Smith, who led them to a 21-1 record in his 2 years as a starter, is going to be inducted to the College Football Hall of Fame as part of the 2024 class. Kudos to him; he's earned it. With all the, what could have been and all the injuries and the battling back, he's really earned it. And he was special in college. I remember watching him. He was something else. He was one of the better quarterbacks around. And then I think you put this one in. Utah State head coach Blake Anderson is on administrative leave with the intent to terminate. Defensive coordinator Nate Dreiling was named the interim, and I believe if I am correct, I'll have to double check. I believe they've went ahead and named him the head coach. They've removed the interim name and put him as the head coach.
Not technically, no.
Not technically.
Because he's only on Blake Anderson's on administrative leave for 2 weeks, basically. He has the ability to appeal the decision as part of their personnel policy. So I would say Drilling's leading the coach for sure, but like he's not officially. I mean, I guess you could say he's going to be the head coach, but technically, Blake Anderson's still the head coach until those 14 days expire. At least that's the way I understand it.
Well, I think if Dreiling wants the job, I think it's going to be him.
For sure.
Because I started looking into this, and this is a little, a 2 week ban or whatever leave. This is going to be bigger because this is a Title IX infraction. And when I started looking into that, there was some reports of non-compliance with Title IX, which the subcategory in the Title IX stated. Hang on, I'll tell you right here in just a second.
Well, it wasn't just him. It was the athletic director at the time, and then there was another member of the football staff. And since all this broke yesterday, of course, Blake Anderson has a lawyer now, and and they're gonna challenge it. And then I think the lawyer released a statement, and it said something to the effect of, "You can't blame the coach for the failures of his boss," which would have been the athletic director that was also fired at the same time. So, I mean, at the end of the day, where does this end? Blake, it's pretty clear Blake Anderson will not be back as the head coach. I think the things that will still be decided is whether he was fired for cause, which means they don't have to pay him, or if they're going to have to pay out his contract, which is the whole purpose of what the attorney's going to try to do, right? Is to make sure he's going to get his money. And
that was kind of the gist of it, because, like I said, the Title IX, which require full and timely reporting of disclosures of sexual misconduct, including domestic violence, and prohibit employees from investigating disclosures of sexual misconduct. That's the reason they're saying they're firing. Like you said, his lawyer is saying it's because they want to get out from under his contract. This is kind of the
his lawyer was saying that. No, his lawyer was saying that. So that the athletic director at the time, who I don't know what his position was today, but he got put on administrative leave too yesterday, and so the lawyer was saying, "Hey, like what he was supposed to do, it was the athletic director that didn't do what they were supposed to do," and so of course it's all going to play out in court. So whatever, but at the end of the day, Anderson's not going to be the coach. I think the important things to know from this is when it's official that he's no longer the head coach, that opens up a 30-day portal window for all Utah State players.
Yes. Yes, it does.
And so technically, I mean, I don't know this, but my assumption is that's not open yet because he's still technically the head coach because he's only on administrative leave. So that doesn't mean I'm sure players aren't getting phone calls and making deals, and so that when it does become official, that they can do whatever they're going to do.
Right. So you're right. The 30-day window does not open until he's officially relieved of his duties. And it was Associate Vice President and Deputy Athletic Director Jerry Bovey and Director of Player Development and Community Austin Albrecht that was also dismissed along with him. So all three of them, and it says here they have 14 days to respond, as you mentioned. So I don't know if this goes to court or something; it could be caught up forever.
Yeah, I mean the 14 days is just to go to, I guess, to challenge the decision through a personnel board kind of thing. In terms of him getting paid the rest of his contract, that's going to be an actual legal process. unless they just say,
Exactly.
"Hey, yeah, we're going to pay you" or whatever. But the interesting thing is, I don't think this would happen. I think any school that did this would be a fool to do it. But it just kind of points out, in my opinion, kind of a loophole or a potential loophole is, so let's say Utah State thinks that they're going to lose 60 players in the portal when that happens. Well, they ain't going to be able to replace 60 players in a matter of weeks, right? And so
Right.
they could, in theory, leave him on administrative leave for the whole season, and that 30-day window would never open up.
Well, see, that was going to be my question to you. What if, like I said, what if this goes to court and they appeal and all this, and officially he's never relieved of his duties? That was my question. That window won't open.
Correct.
So,
but I don't think. I think after this 14 days, he'll either be fired or not. I think. I just think if a school did something like that, they'd be shooting them. I mean, yeah, they're gonna if 60 players leave, they're screwed no matter what. But like if you did something like that, kept him on administrative leave for the purpose of keeping the players there, then like you're shooting yourself in the foot like long down the road, buddy. Like who's gonna want to come play for you at that point?
yeah, it's kind of a mess, and it's a mess for Dreiling too, right? Because he's kind of handcuffed at the moment. I mean, he's got the interim tag, but
I'm sure they're
the
taking
uncertainty
to talk to every single player and try to get a feel for like what may or may not happen when it becomes official.
Yeah, and I think if I'm Nate Dreiling, I think and the coaches that stay, I think I would approach the team like this. Hey, this is out there. This is what's happened. Whatever. We'd love to have you because clearly we recruited you here. But we'd ask, this late in the year, right, with the season knocking on the door, just stay with us. And then at season's end, if you want to transfer out or when the next window opens up, you want to transfer out, then no hard feelings, whatever. Because I think if that, like you said, if that window opens at any point from today forward, that's going to put Utah State, as far as the team and the coaches, in a bind. Because if those players start leaving, that's going to be hard to fill. Like you said, that's a tough task.
If there is a positive thing, I guess, like you got to figure most schools, they're already full on scholarships, right? So there can't be a ton of spots available, but I can see them losing like key personnel, like, Jalen Royals, a wide receiver, like one of the top wide receivers in college football. Like I can see him being gone, or I can see them losing some very important players because, someone's going to make room for a Jalen Royals if he wants to go somewhere, right?
Exactly.
So I could definitely see that happening.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. And I was like, man, we're this close to the season, and now it comes out, and I'm like, wow, that's going to be rough for them. So I don't know. It's definitely something to watch and monitor. I hate that for the school and the university and the players to be caught up in something like that this late in the year. But we've seen it before, right? Or similar things happen, and it always seems that these teams kind of have 9 lives, or like a cat, they land on their feet. So it may be a little rough, but I think they'll be all right. Our 5-star topic for today is coaching changes and transfer portal news for the Big 12 Conference. Before we get to that, go check out our website, idpnation.com, our Discord, and our Patreon for all your IDP Devy needs. We're growing. It keeps growing, and we ask you to help us keep growing with that. If I could get this thing to work. Oh, yeah. So we're up to almost 500 on Twitter. We're almost to 50 on the Discord, and our YouTube's growing. Please go rate, subscribe, or subscribe, review wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple, Spotify, YouTube especially. Follow us on Twitter, Stitcher, Podbean, iTunes, wherever you can listen to a podcast. Go give us a follow and give us a review. We appreciate it. And while we're on that, I've got to plug you and Luke's pod too. G5 Hive. Follow them. They're on YouTube. The same thing. Go check them out. Give them a follow or rate and subscribe and all that good stuff. If you want offense, they're the two you need to go check out because they do a really, really good job. I've been sitting here all day watching it. So y'all do a good job on that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
You're welcome. So our 5-star topic is the Big 12 Conference. We're going to start alphabetically here. We're going to start with the Arizona Wildcats. Excuse me. Coaching changes. Going out is Jed Fish. He's leaving to go be the head coach of Washington. 16-21 his last 3 years with Arizona, which I know is not very good, but he was 10-3 last year and got a bowl win and finished the season ranked number 11 in the nation. I was looking at it, 16-21, like I said, that's not the best, but he didn't walk into the best situation in Arizona either. So he won 1 game his first year. He won 5 games or 6 games his second year, and then he had the 10-3 mark last year. So I think with him moving to Washington, he's going to have a whole lot better player personnel grouping than he had at Arizona. And it looks like he's taken most of his coaches. Yeah. And it looks like he's taken most of his coaches with him. So his defensive coordinator is gone, but he went to Texas to coach the linebackers, and that's Johnny Nansen. Cornerbacks coach John Richardson left to go to Washington to coach corners, and defensive line coach Jason Kufasi also went to Washington. So he had 3 of his assistants follow him there. To replace him, and as we say every show, when you fire the head coach, it's usually the whole regime is gone at some point. But replacing him is going to be Brent Brennan, who was the head coach for San Jose State, and he was 34-48 in his 7 seasons there. Kind of the same thing. His career kind of started off slow. He had to build that up, but he's had some good seasons down there the last few years. He brought in to coach special teams and linebackers. He brought in Danny Gonzalez, who was a former head coach himself from New Mexico. I've talked about how I love when a head coach will bring in other head coaches to help. I love that. I just think the experience there is so valuable. So I don't think he's got the rest of his roster quite filled out just yet, as he's got people in place, but not specific. But those are the 2. Brennan is the head coach, and then special teams and linebackers is Danny Gonzalez.
Player-wise, they lose safety DJ Warnell Jr. to Indiana, defensive lineman Bill Norton to Texas, edge Isaiah Ward to Washington, edge Russell Davis to Washington, cornerback Charles Yates to Old Dominion, and safety Cruz Rushing to Oregon. They bring in cornerback Demetrius Freeney from Miami, edge Chase Kennedy from Utah, defensive lineman Stanley Taofofo from USC, defensive lineman Jar Anderson, Memphis, edge Lance Kenley from Stanford, and edge Trey Smith comes over from San Jose State. They do return their top 3 leading tacklers from a year ago, and that's linebacker Jacob Manu, safeties Dalton Johnson and Gunnar McDonald. All 3 of them return, and Justin Flo also returns for what seems like his 7th year in college. Linebacker, former.
Are you giving up on Justin Flo?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think at this point it's time, right? I mean, we've talked about him for years, and when he come out of high school, he was like a top 5 recruit, if not the top overall recruit. I can't remember, but he was way up there.
He was highly rated recruit, and has never panned out.
Yeah, I mean, he had some flashes at Oregon, and showed the potential and the promise. But injuries kind of got in the way and all that. And then he's transferred to Arizona. I was hoping that maybe he would rebound there, and I think he has a little bit, but not to what we thought he would be. And I think with all the options at linebacker, he's just not somebody that. I mean, you can keep him on a watch list or something, but he's just not somebody that I'm really looking to roster right now. Kind of the same with like a Corey Foreman, right? Number one overall recruit, just never panned out, changed schools. And Foreman, somebody that I've dropped completely off my top 325. So interesting. Arizona State is next. Going out as their defensive line coach, Vince Amy, and he's going to Michigan State. Or no, he's going to. Why does that say that? Anyway, he's going to be an analyst. I think he's stepping down, is what it is. He's going to be an analyst, and then they're bringing in Dyron Reynolds from Michigan State to coach the D line, and that's what he did at Michigan State for the Spartans as well. So they're just swapping out defensive line coaches.
All right. Player wise, they lose cornerback Ed Woods off to Michigan State, defensive lineman BJ Green to Colorado, edge James DeJoncum off to Eastern Michigan. An interesting thing about him is supposedly he's playing middle linebacker for Eastern Michigan. So he goes from an edge at Arizona State to a middle linebacker for Eastern Michigan, which seems odd to me, but that's
Wow.
what I've heard. And then they lose safety Jordan Clark to Notre Dame. They bring in defensive lineman Zach Swanson from Texas, edge Jamon Trapp from Texas, linebacker Cyrus Fiasau from San Diego State, cornerback LaTerrence Webb from LSU, linebacker Jordan Crook from Arkansas, and safety Kamari Wilson comes over from Florida. And they do return their leading tackler from a year ago, defensive back Shamari Simmons, but they lost their leading tackler from a linebacker's perspective in Travian Brown, who graduated. So, they like I said, Simmons was the leading tackler a year ago, 73 total tackles. They bring in, like I said, Fiasau comes in. He had 64 tackles a year ago from San Diego State. I'm sorry. And then BJ Green, probably their biggest loss on the defensive line, goes out to Colorado.
Yeah. I think losing BJ Green really hurts them out because he was their top pass rusher, 11.5 TFL, 6 sacks. So, and they don't really have a whole lot behind him. So, as far as experience or talent wise, so I think that's going to be a big blow to them right there. Up next is the Baylor Bears. They did not have any coaching changes at this time.
And they don't lose a ton. They do lose a big one on that line, though. Gabe Hall, who's off to the NFL, so that's kind of a big loss for that defensive line. They bring in cornerback LaRondo Johnson from Arkansas. And maybe you can look into this, Hollywood, while I'm going through the rest of this. But I'm pretty sure he was at Baylor. And then I guess he transferred to Arkansas for a year. And now he's come back to Baylor. I could be wrong about that, but I feel like LaRondo Johnson was at Baylor and then transferred to Arkansas. They bring in edge Jock Evans from Western Kentucky, who 2 years ago was very productive for Western Kentucky. He was one of their top tacklers, the top pass rush specialist as well. So that's kind of interesting to see what he can do here for Baylor as Jock Evans. They bring in edge Steve Linton over from Texas Tech. And then they bring in another player over from Western Kentucky in safety Kendrick Simpkins. And then the last player I wanted to mention that they bring over is someone that kind of like Justin Flo was highly thought of recruit, and it just has never panned out. They bring in Ra Dilworth. This time he's coming from East Carolina. He initially started at North Carolina, goes to East Carolina. He does absolutely nothing for East Carolina, and now he's off to Baylor. And so I don't know. It just like maybe he'll find some playing time at Baylor, but if he couldn't get playing time at East Carolina, to me that speaks volumes. And definitely, if you still have him on a roster, I would not be holding on to him, hoping something changes.
Yeah, and that seems to be tonight's theme, right? Players that had a lot of potential and promise and just haven't met expectations or have fizzled out. So,
in terms of what they return, their leading tackler from a year ago, linebacker Matt Jones, returns, and then the number 2 and number 3 guys were safeties Devin Bobby and Devin Lemire. Jones had 84 tackles. Devin Bobby had 74, and Devin Lemire had 40 a year ago. So nothing to my opinion to get too excited about.
right. And back to LaRondo Johnson, you are correct. He was a safety for Baylor in 2021, played very little. 2022, he moved to corner. Nothing really stands out. I mean, he did have 5 PBUs, but nothing really stood out. Then he goes to Arkansas, and they used him a little bit of everywhere. He had a decent season. I mean, the 29 tackles, 20 solos are not very high, but he's efficient. He had 4 TFLs, a sack, an interception, and 5 more PBUs, and his interception he returned for a touchdown. So, yeah, Baylor to Arkansas, and now back to Baylor. So that's a weird – usually when you leave a place, you don't go back, but
yeah,
apparently no bridges were burned.
Yeah. All right. Next up is the UCF Knights.
Nope, you skipped one, BYU.
Oh, I'm sorry, BYU.
Yeah, so the BYU Cougars going out on the coaching staff is their linebackers coach Christian Robinson. He's leaving to go coach the outside linebackers at Alabama. Their defensive line coach Dennis Johnson is leaving to go to the pros, and he's going to coach the defensive line for the Baltimore Ravens. So apparently they think highly of him for him to take that huge level step up. So congrats to him. Replacing those two, and I kind of like this first one, is they brought in to coach the linebackers. Well, it says inside linebackers, but I'm sure he's going to coach all of them. Jamar Chaney, who was the outside linebacker coach for Western Kentucky, he's a pretty good coach. So I like that get for them. And then to replace that defensive line coach is going to be Anaki Brechterfield. I hate these names. Anaki Brechterfield, who was the defensive line coach for San Diego State. So, yeah, I like both of those coaches because San Diego State has the last few years they've had some decent defensive line play and prospects. Yeah, so that's a good get for them.
Player-wise, they lose defensive tackle Danny Salih to Arkansas, cornerback Quentin Rice to Kansas State. Their leading tackler, Max Tooley, is out of eligibility, and their second leading tackler, AJ Vong Fakan, is also out of eligibility. They bring in edge Cho Bryant Struther from UCLA. Their top returning tackler is Ethan Slade. He was a safety with 60 tackles a year ago. So they got to replace Max Tooley's 92 tackles and AJ Vong Fakan's 85 tackles. I would assume Ben Bywater will be one of the guys, but not sure who else might replace those. If I remember correctly, AJ Vong Fakan was really more of like an outside linebacker edge type. Is that what your memory is?
Who was it now? Sorry, I cut out.
AJ Vong Fakan.
Oh yeah, he was more of an edge rusher.
Yeah, but he was their second leading tackler, 85 tackles a year ago. So I'm not really sure. Yeah. I think Bywater probably replaces Tooley, but I don't know who. I don't have no idea who the next edge is.
Which is crazy to me because Thule's been there forever, right? Because of which happens at BYU with their missions and all that. But I would have thought Ben Bywater had been there forever too. Now I know he got hurt last year. He only played 4 games. When healthy, he's a tackle machine. So I'm with you. He's most likely going to be the one that takes over for Thule. Pass rusher. Oh man, I don't know if this guy is still there. Let me. I want to say he's going too.
Batty's still there.
Yeah. That's who I was looking at.
Yeah, he's still there.
So I think he's going to be their top returning pass rusher. 9 TFLs, 5.5 sacks a year ago. So I think that's their best option as of right now. But yeah, Max Thule, he seems like he's been there for a decade. Now to your UFC Knights. No coaching changes.
All right. They do have some personnel losses, though. They lose edge Josh Seliskar off to Texas A&M. Their leading tackler from a year ago, linebacker Jason Johnson, is out of eligibility. Their second leading tackler from a year ago, linebacker Walter Yates III, is out of eligibility. Defensive end Tremont Morris-Brash out of eligibility. And safety Jairo Wilson is also out of eligibility. They bring in safety Cedric Hawkins from Ohio State, edge Nigel Kelly from Miami, linebacker Josiah Pierre from Texas Tech, and safety Deshaun Pace from Cincinnati. Kelly was a pretty high-level recruit too, I believe, for Miami. I don't think he ever really did anything for Miami. It'll be interesting to see, with them losing Seliskar and Morris-Brash, it'll be interesting to see if Kelly can step up and kind of help replace some of that pass rush they lost with those two guys.
Yeah, especially Morris-Brash, right? I mean, that's a ton. 20.5 TFLs and 8.5 sacks. Yeah, that's a huge loss for them. Kind of looking here, and I think this guy's still there, if I'm not mistaken. Malachi Lawrence. Let me look.
Yep, he's still there.
I don't know if he had a year left.
He's still there.
So yeah, he's going to be a senior. Yeah, so he's probably their returning leading pass rusher with 10.5 lost TFLs, 7.5 sacks. So, but that's still big shoes to fill. So we'll have to see how that shakes out. Up next is the Cincinnati Bearcats, and they had no coaching change.
But we already know they lost some personnel. I just mentioned.
Oh, sorry. They do have a coaching change. I read it wrong. So their defensive coordinator, Brian Brown, is gone, and he's moving to coach the secondary at Ole Miss, which I guess is all right for Ole Miss. I like that pickup. And then replacing him is going to be Tyson Bate, who was a linebackers coach from Iowa State. So as far as defense goes, they're replacing their top guy, their defensive coordinator. So be interesting to see how that plays out. Bate he's had some pretty good defenses with the Cyclones, especially at linebacker, right? With some of the guys he's had over the last few years. So it'll be interesting to see what he can do there in Cincinnati.
All right. Like I said, they did lose some players. I already mentioned that safety Deshaun Pace is off to UCF. Linebacker Dorian James off to Virginia. Safety Jaden Davis to Georgia Tech. Edge Jamal Williams off to Troy. Safety George Udos off to Ball State. They bring in defensive lineman Darian Varner from Wisconsin. Cornerback Derek Canteen from Virginia Tech, and then safety Kai Stokes coming over from Ohio State. That's a big one for them, Kai Stokes. And the returning leading tackler was I guess third last year was Jack Dingle linebacker with 53 total tackles. And then a big, it's not really a loss for them, but it could be, is defensive tackle Dante Corleone, who I guess is getting some treatment for blood clots in the lungs. So who knows how long he'll be out.
Yeah, we were talking to Sal about that in the Discord the other day, and there's been some history of that with some other players where they had to miss some significant time with that. So hope he gets better and back on the field. But of course, health is the main thing. But yeah, that's losing him. That's a big loss because he had some NFL
potential
aspirations, and and there was a lot of interest in him, right? So you were beginning to see his name start to pop up on some big boards and draft boards. So yeah, that's a big loss for them. Now we go to Colorado, everybody's favorite team, right? We can't get enough of the Buffaloes up there. So they are losing defensive end coach Nick Williams, and he is headed to Syracuse to coach the same position, if I could talk. And then to replace him, they're bringing in defensive end and to coach defensive end and outside linebackers. They're bringing in Vincent Dancy, who was an analyst for them last year, so they're promoting him. And then they're bringing in Robert Livingston to coach the defensive coordinator position. Now, I didn't see who was out there anywhere, so I don't know if it was they just kind of changed defensive coordinators. But Robert Livingston is the new DC, and if that name sounds familiar, that's because he was the safeties coach for the Cincinnati Bengals. So they're bringing in some NFL coaching to help with Dion's crew on defense.
All right, personnel. They lose some big personnel, especially in the defensive backfield. Cornerback Amarian Cooper off to Florida State. Cornerback Cormani McClain off to Florida. And defensive lineman Chaz Wallace to NC State. Linebacker Jordan Dominic out of eligibility. And linebacker Jawan Mitchell is out of eligibility. They bring in safety Savion Riley from Miami. Defensive end, Deion Hayes from Pittsburgh. And then we talked about him earlier. BJ Green comes over from Arizona State. In terms of who they, returning production, their leading tackler from a year ago, Levante Bentley, who had 69 tackles returns. Shiloh Sanders returns. Trevor Woods returned. They're both their safeties. They were number 2 and 3 last year, but they didn't do a whole lot. 67 tackles, 56 tackles. The surprising thing for me was, as bad as this team was on defense, like no one really racked up the tackles a year ago.
Yeah, I mean that was kind of surprising, especially with what they had as far as the secondary goes with Shiloh and Trevor Woods. It was more of a group effort, right? I mean, I know they brought in Jawan Mitchell, but that story's been done since he was at Texas. It was kind of a mixed match. It was like nobody really took the lead on that, which I expected Trevor Woods to be that guy. I thought he would be upwards close to 100 tackles, especially with how that team was built and playing, right? So, yeah, that kind of shocked me as well. Up next is the Houston Cougars. Again, they fired their head coach, Dana Holgerson. He was 31 and 28 in his 5 years with the Cougars. So they got rid of him. Their defensive coordinator, Doug Belk, left to coach DBs at USC. Their defensive line coach, Brian Early, left to coach defensive line at Missouri. And their linebackers coach, Archie McDaniel, left to go coach the same position at Illinois. Um, Replacing them, they're bringing in head coach Willie Fritz, who was the former head coach at Tulane. He was 54 and 47 in 8 years with the Green Wave, but he was 23 and 4 the last 2 years. So kind of one of them situations where not a lot to work with, had to build it up, get his people in there. And I think once you saw that, you saw the truth, what he could really do, right? I like this coaching hire for the Cougars. I think this is a good one, but I think Houston fans are going to have to be patient a little bit, right? You're going to have to give him a couple years to put his footprint on it.
They weren't a great team last year, and I don't expect them to be good this year.
Yeah, it's going to take him a couple years, maybe even 3, before you really start to see what he can do with his coaching staff. And he had a lot of them follow him, right? So his defensive coordinator at Tulane, Sheil Wood, is coming over to coach to be his DC again. He's bringing James Ross III over, who was an analyst for Tulane. He's going to come over and coach the inside linebackers. Josh Christian Young was the D-backs coach. He's coming over to coach the same position. And then this one I really like. To coach his defensive line, he went to Wyoming and got Oscar Giles, which I love because Wyoming has had some good defensive line players and put a few players in the league over the last few years. So he clearly knows, how to get the best out of those guys. So I think that's going to be huge. And within any league, in the trenches is where it's won, right? So if you can win up front, you've got a good start. So I like that, bringing him over from Wyoming.
In terms of personnel, they lose linebacker Malik Robinson, who's out of eligibility, edge David Ogwuegbu, who's out of eligibility, and he might have gotten a UDFA deal. I don't remember off the top of my head. And then Nelson Caesar, who's off the NFL, another edge. They bring in linebacker Christian Brothwaite from LSU, safety Kentrell Webb from Tulane, and then linebacker Kendra Gant from Louisiana. They return safety A.J. Halsey, their leading tackler from a year ago, and linebacker Jamal Morris, their third leading tackler from a year ago, all return. Got to imagine Grant probably slides in to Malik Robinson's role, who was the second leading tackler a year ago. But, man, that defensive line, they lost a ton on that defensive line. So, man, I just don't expect them to be very good this year.
No, and with that said, A.J. Halsey, that's the guy you want, right? Because if they're not going to be very good, and he is, that's just going to be more opportunities for him. And he was what?
Well, just
98 tackles last year.
Yeah, I mean, you think you would hope so, but I mean, it's a different system. It could could change things for sure, right?
Yes, it could. But with not a lot around it, especially up front, right? You talked about how they're losing along that defensive line.
Yeah.
That means your linebackers and secondary has got to pick up the slack. So I like that there for him. If you've got him on your fantasy team, I like that a lot. Up next is the Iowa State Cyclones. We talked about they lost their linebacker coach, Tyson Bate. He went to Cincinnati to be their defensive coordinator. And then they brought in to coach their linebackers. They brought in Colby Crotch from North Texas, who's had some good run with linebackers. He's produced some pretty good linebackers down there in North Texas. So be interesting to see what he can do at Iowa State, who's had a history of good linebacker play, right? So
yeah, it's interesting, that they bring in a coach from North Texas, and the first player that I'm going to mention that they lose goes to North Texas. So they lose linebacker J.J. John Louis. He's off to North Texas, and then cornerback T.J. Tampa, who's now in the NFL, got drafted in the NFL draft. And they bring in their biggest addition was Kennard Snyder, edge from Louisiana Monroe. They returned their top 2 tacklers from a year ago, defensive back Bo Freiler and linebacker Caleb Bacon. They both return for the Cyclones.
Yeah, and I think both of those are excellent IDP choices, right? I think I have Fryler in 1 or 2 leagues, and then I think I have Bacon in another league. So, um, yeah, that's going to be their top 2. I was thinking they had a third guy. Maybe I was thinking of TJ Tampa, but I don't think that was him. I can't remember who it was, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they do, right? Will McLaughlin, I think he's the linebacker.
Will
yeah,
McDonald.
So he's returning, right? So he had 46.
No, Will McLaughlin?
No, McDonald.
McDonald's in the NFL.
Yeah, McLaughlin.
Yes, Will McLaughlin is returning.
McLaughlin.
Yes.
Yep. So he looks like one of their more experienced guys. So maybe somebody to keep an eye on because he's just a junior. 46 tackles, 7 TFLs last year, a couple interceptions. So be interesting to see what he can do. Next is the Kansas Jayhawks. So their defensive back Jordan Peterson left to go to Texas A&M to coach the same position, and then coming in to coach defensive backs. And I found this interesting. So they're bringing in DK McDonald, and he is going to replace Peterson as the defensive backs coach, but he's also going to be their co-defensive coordinator, and he is coming over from the Philadelphia Eagles where he coached defensive backs. So you don't see a whole lot of co-defensive coordinator, co-offensive coordinator. You don't see that very much. I just found that a little interesting, but I like the get for him. I think that can only help him.
All right. They do have some big losses, though. They don't have a lot of losses, but they do have some really big ones. Defensive lineman Gage Keys is off to Auburn. Their leading tackler from a year ago, safety Kenny Logan Jr., is out of eligibility. I don't know if he got a UDFA or not. He wasn't drafted. And then probably the biggest one is defensive end Austin Booker is off to the NFL. He did get drafted. And then they bring in Edge by Job from Michigan State. Their top returning tackler from a year ago is linebacker J.B. Brown, who had 54 tackles. And they return also Kobe Bryant, who's big from a quarterback perspective, and Mello Dotson, two really good cornerbacks for them that probably this time next year we're going to be talking about they're gone because they both got drafted by the NFL.
Yeah, I like both of those, and they have a lot of production to replace with Booker and Kenny Logan Jr. being gone, right? So
yeah,
that's a lot of tackles, a lot of TFLs that you've got to replace. So be interesting to see how they do on defense, replacing those guys. The Kansas State Wildcats are next. I didn't see that they were making any changes as far as going out, but they did bring in Nate Kaiser to be their special teams analyst. And he was formerly the special teams coach for the Washington Commanders. So clearly Kansas State wants to upgrade their special teams. I think anytime you're fortunate enough to get an NFL caliber coach to help you at the college level, I think that's just invaluable of that kind of knowledge and what it takes at that level, right? And he could pass it on to those guys. So no real changes, just their special teams. Nate Kaiser.
They lose safety Kobe Savage off to Oregon, but they bring in a top guy from the G5 and safety Jordan Riley from Ball State, who I'm assuming probably just gonna take over for that role that Savage vacated. They return their top 3 tacklers from a year ago: Austin Moore, linebacker, And then safeties, VJ Payne and Marquise Sigel, they both return as well. They were all Austin Moore and Marcus Sigel, 63 tackles, and VJ Payne had 57 tackles a year ago. Now, Payne was someone I know you liked.
I like the VJ Payne. Yeah. Well, I saw him a couple years ago when he was a freshman against Alabama in the bowl game, and despite the shellacking, he played really well. And I thought, okay, being a freshman, there's an opportunity there because I think they had some turnover. I can't remember who it was, but I was like, okay, he's going to be the next guy I believe it was next to Kobe Savage, actually. And he didn't quite have the season that I thought he would, but being a full-time starter for the first time, I can kind of see the transition. So maybe this year is his year, his third year. I don't know how good Kansas State's going to be overall. And if they lack at all offensively, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for him as a starter in safety. I think there'll be a lot of opportunities for him to make plays. So put him on your watch list for IDP. Or if you like me, if you still have him rostered in a couple places, I would hold on to him just for a little bit and see what happens starting this year. But yeah, I like him. Let's see. Up next is the Oklahoma State Cowboys. They had no coaching changes going out, but they did bring in Paul Randolph from Indiana to coach their defensive line, and that's the same position he held with the Hoosiers.
Personnel-wise, they lose safety Lardarius Webb Jr. to South Alabama. Linebacker Xavier Benson is out of eligibility, and defensive end Anthony Goodlow is out of eligibility. They bring in safety Kobe Hilton from UTEP. They return their top 4 leading tacklers from a year ago. That's linebacker Nicholas Martin, safety Kendall Daniels, safety Trey Rucker, and they call him a linebacker, but he's really an edge, Colin Oliver.
Right. And one moment here, we had a listener question, so I think now's the perfect opportunity to bring it up. Our buddy Dougie, he wanted to know our thoughts on Nicholas Martin. He wants to know how good we think he can be this year. I think he's actually going to be pretty good. I mean, if you look at what he did last year, 140 tackles, 16 for a loss, 6 sacks, 2 interceptions, a fumble recovery, forced fumble. He pretty much did a little bit of everything for them. Now, my question to you is, they had 3 players with 100-plus tackles. I don't know if they'll have 3 again with that many.
Yeah.
But I do think Nicholas Martin is going to be your leader. And I have him in my Devy IDP rankings. I have him listed in my top 15 right now. So I think if he can get 140 tackles again, he has to be that high, right? I mean,
sure.
With the TFLs and the sacks.
What do you think of his NFL potential? So, I look at Oklahoma State, look at their roster. They have him listed at 6 foot even. Generally speaking, rosters don't tell the truth, right? And so that makes me think he's under 6 foot, which to me probably kills his NFL potential, but I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts exactly. Because we've seen it too many times before with players under 6'2", really. If you're under 6'2", it's hard for you to, I don't want to say make it to the NFL, but to be really up there with the upper echelon of prospects that go into the NFL each year. Now, I will say, I think at times your height and weight can be overrated. If you can play football,
look at
you can play
Zach
football.
Thomas, right? Look at Zach Thomas. I mean, he's the poster child for them. But the odds are stacked against you.
I think yes, with his size, the odds are stacked against him, if I could speak. But I think if he can replicate what he did last year or be very close to those numbers, he's going to get a look. Somebody's going to say, hey, he did it in a Power Five conference. If he gets 140, that's going to be 280 tackles in 2 years. There's a place in the NFL for players like that. Now, will he be a full-time starter? Again, I think the odds are kind of against him because of size, but I think he makes a roster at least as a special teams player or a backup at the very least. I don't think he's going to be drafted high. I think he's a mid-round to late guy at best. But I think there's a chance there. We've seen crazier things happen. So, but thanks, Dougie, for the question. You're always sending us questions and stuff. So thank you for that. That was a good time to bring that up. The next up is the TCU Horned Frogs. So they fired their defensive coordinator, Joe Gillespie, and replacing him, they are bringing in head coach or former head coach of Boise State, Andy Avalos. I love this. I think it's a great move for them. TCU definitely needs to improve on defense. We just saw they were in way too many shootouts. Probably would have had a better season if their defense could have made a few stops along the way, but I think that was a change that had to be made.
Personnel-wise, the first one is a big one. They lose defensive tackle Demonic Williams off to Oklahoma. That's a huge loss for that defense. You don't hear a lot about defensive tackles, and that's a good thing, right? They're not the guys getting all the tackles and all the sacks. They're the guys eating up the blocks, so the other guys can get the tackles and the sacks. But that's a huge loss for TCU. They lose linebacker Jamoy Hodge out of eligibility, safety Mark Perry out of eligibility. They bring in cornerback Lamarian James from Old Dominion, and linebacker Caleb Ilarmzor comes over from California. Their leading returning tackler is Nnamdi Obiazor, also a linebacker with 75 tackles from a year ago. And then their second leading tackler from last year, third, because Hodge was number one. Shad Banks Jr., also a linebacker. He had 57 tackles a year ago.
Yep. Let's see here. TCU. Up next is the Texas Tech Red Raiders, and they had no coaching change.
They do have some personnel losses. So we mentioned earlier they lost edge Steve Linton to Baylor, linebacker Josiah Pierre to Central Florida, and then they lose safety Dadrian Taylor Demerson, who got drafted, as well as defensive end Miles Cole, and then edge Tony Bradford is out of eligibility. They do bring in defensive lineman DeBraylon Carroll over from Rice, but that defensive line, particularly the edge position, losing Linton, Bradford, and Miles Cole, those are some pretty big losses for a team that isn't necessarily known for defense to begin with, right? But they do return their leading tackler from a year ago, Ben Roberts, linebacker, who was a bright spot for them last year, as well as second leading tackler, defensive back C.J. Baskerville.
Yeah, I've heard Baskerville's name a lot, so he may generate some draft buzz. Not too bad, right? 78 tackles, 54 solos, had 4.5 for a loss, 2 interceptions, 5 pass deflections. So I think they're going to ask of him to fill in a lot for Dadrian Taylor Demerson. And you took the words right out of my mouth. Texas Tech is not generally known for defense, right, or defensive prospects. So to lose some of these top guys, I think they're going to be hurting. But it'll be interesting to see who it is that steps in and replaces these guys. Next is the Utah Utes, and they have no coaching changes other than the head coach in waiting that we talked about in the news and notes. But as far as the staff, there's no changes there.
Player-wise, they lose quite a bit to the NFL, especially in the defensive backfield. Safety Cole Bishop, safety, who's now going to play running back in the NFL, played some running back last season for Utah as well, in addition to safety. Sony Vaki, there with the Detroit Lions. I think Cole Bishop's a Buffalo Bill. And then defensive end edge Jonah Ellis is also in the NFL. I don't recall who drafted him off the top of my head, but I know he was drafted. And they bring in safety Alakai Gilman from Stanford. Their leading returning linebacker or tackler, top two tacklers from a year ago, both linebackers return, and Lavani Damuni and Corinne Reed. And they also returned their fourth leading tackler, Zamaya Vaughn, cornerback.
Yeah, losing those two safeties, that's a killer, man. I mean, you're talking about at the college level, two of the best safeties in the country, right? And then Bishop, I think he's going to be one of the best rookie safeties, best rookies in the NFL this year as far as defense goes. Not to get off track, but I just think with them losing Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde, and I know they have Taylor Rapp there, but to bring in a player like Cole Bishop who can play down in the box, I think that's huge for both of them, you know, for Buffalo and him. So a little bit of NFL talk there for you. You mentioned Jonah Ellis, and I'm trying to find it. My computer's a little slow, but if I'm not mistaken, he's in Denver.
Okay.
I think that's where he landed. Pretty sure. Damani was their leading tackler, like you mentioned. I think they're going to count on him a lot. To replace Ellis, and this is a guy that, he's got one more year. So he kind of broke out a couple years ago with a real, back in 21 with a really good season. And that's Van Fillinger, 6'4", 260, if you believe in those numbers. But he should have a senior year. This should be his last year. The pass rush numbers kind of dropped off the last year or so, but with Ellis gone now, I think they're going to rely on him to be that next guy. And with his size, he has some NFL potential. He's not really nobody that I'm going out to get, but as far as IDP Devy, if he's one of the starters there, then I think he can put up some pretty good numbers for Utah because they should run the Big 12, I would imagine. So. And then up next and finally is the West Virginia Mountaineers. Coaching changes. They lost their safeties coach, Dante Wright, and he left to go be the defensive coordinator for Troy. And coming in to coach their outside linebackers is Victor Cabral, who was the defensive line coach for App State.
Personnel-wise, they lose defensive lineman Tomiwa Durajaye to Florida State, leading tackler Lee Kapoga out of eligibility, and cornerback Beanie Bishop out of eligibility. They bring in defensive lineman TJ Jackson from Troy and linebacker Reed Carrico from Ohio State. Their top returning tackler is safety Anthony Wilson, who had 80 tackles a year ago.
So that does it for our Big 12. We answered our listener question by Big Dougie. Thank you for that. We thank everyone for listening. Please spread the word, help us grow, right? Go subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on Twitter, at Hollywood Titan, at Justice_2318, and at Devy IDP Grind. Again, we thank y'all for listening. We will be back next Wednesday at 8 o'clock, and we'll be doing the ACC.
Big Ten. where he did
Oh,
ACC.
Big Ten. Sorry. Yeah, we'll be back next week with the Big Ten. Yep, we'll be back next week with the Big Ten, and then we'll follow up in 2 weeks with the SEC. As always, if you have any questions, send them our way, and we'll get those answered. Until then, we shall see you next week.